Hi, everyone. It's very fun to be following up Peter's talk because I'll be talking about community-driven drug development, if this stays on. And so the key here is kind of how do we then go from the work that he's doing into then translating that into personalized medicine, and to do that in a way that maintains sovereign AI principles. And so is there a way to solidify this? There we go. So the key thing here is that basically I want to first zoom out and then zoom very much in and then zoom out again. And another key thing that I'll highlight is that when it comes to the sovereign AI component of all this, I'm hoping, let's see if someone can help me. But yeah, what you'll see right now is kind of a pragmatic solution in terms of moving quite quickly to demonstrate these capabilities. And then this is really an invitation for collaboration with people in this room on how we can harden a lot of the different capabilities here from also to the hardware stack. So I think we can all agree that health is a central pillar of a thriving society. And I think the big thing now is basically that if we, let's see here, biology and health data is kind of the current frontier. You might have seen a lot of the frontier AI labs are either purchasing whole stack the infrastructure to be able to close the loop between their models and health data and biological data. And so what we want to do here is to kind of highlight that right now is the moment where we can essentially have a chance to bring the sovereign AI stack as the solution rather than basically handing over all our data to a handful of centralized providers that run away with it. Let's see if that holds. Okay. And so the key thing to be aware of here, how many of you are kind of familiar with bio and AI, just as a show of hands? I'll see how deep I go on this. Okay, I'll do some more explanation. Essentially, a key kind of focus of the moment is really closing the loop between the digital and the physical world and be able to do it as fast as possible. And so you have closed labs that are doing this in one physical space, but what we want to try to encourage is more of a programmatic ecosystem that lets us work with multiple different providers and encourages a diversity of approaches when you're trying to do this. And I think what's exciting is that, okay, every time I touch it, it does something. What's exciting is essentially that there's now the opportunity to showcase this, and we've been able to get quite far, so I'll talk about that in a second. But I also want to highlight the kind of real risks in this scenario. So as many of you probably are aware, there was the recent kind of export ban on Fable that came out. Now, any biologists in the room already experienced what it's like to have an export ban, because as soon as Fable came out, if you had even the word biology in your history using a service like Claude, it basically blocked your access. And I was in a room of computational biology or cellular biologists when it was released, and literally none of them could use it. So this, people have now experienced a more broad experience of what happens when a provider basically who has trained on your data suddenly, either from an external pressure or internally, decides this is too dangerous for you to use. And so I think, in the context of health and sovereign AI, this just goes to show, if you integrate these systems deeply into your health network, then if it can suddenly be turned off, you have a whole different consequence beyond just what has been currently experienced on a agentic coding side. And so I think what you really want is a more resilient infrastructure with distributed access to these capabilities, and that extends to the hardware and physical space side. So another piece that I'll speak about is that if you can get these rails right, you can encourage both the physical infrastructure to be created that allows us to then have that loop between the digital and the physical be closed more effectively, but in a way where access can't be blocked based on a handful of countries' decisions. And I think another part here to highlight is that open source is actually a key advantage here. So we work with a lot of different stakeholders in the biotech ecosystem, and open source actually allows you to collaborate much more quickly than if you try to do things in a proprietary way. So this can be an advantage. So strategically, if you're trying to tell the narrative of sovereign AI, this is an audience that very much is receptive to it across, also more traditional players in a way that I think opens up for new solutions also from a funding perspective. So that was sorry about the technical glitch. Hopefully that was a somewhat clear introduction. But now I want to dive into then what we've done so far to kind of showcase this idea of, okay, how can we have drug development that's more accessible, leveraging computational biology tools and handing that off to the wet lab for verification. And so next, I'll do another show of hands. How many of you are familiar with like the whole claw harness craze, OpenClaw, all of this? Is there anyone who isn't familiar with it in this room? Most people are. Okay, so I'll do a quick intro of this to anyone who didn't raise their hand. I think the key reason I want to highlight this is just to say that I've been working in the space of, for example, I think, Peter, you mentioned biologists don't necessarily want to adopt new things in this way or infrastructure. What we found is that this claw harness really is kind of a UX solve for that, where basically you can create an experience that easily makes it a way to get feedback from the biologists and help them orchestrate a lot of these different computational tools and create templates for that going forward. And so we took that theory and we basically applied it for the design and validation of peptides for multiple reasons, which I'm happy to talk about after the presentation or at lunch. But essentially what we wanted to showcase was that you could have an agentic orchestration that targets a receptor, comes up with candidate peptides, and then computationally validates them through a series of gates, where importantly, to the previous conversation, they're using different existing computational biology models to basically do this validation of the candidate, and this basically de-risks it before handing it off to the wet lab to do the, the experimental work that really provides the strongest signal of whether this makes sense or not. And so we essentially then had this agentic orchestrator, and it is given a series of tools, and it uses different service providers for that as well, and in fact pays some of them via X402, so there's an on-chain element for how this is conducted, which gives you full transparency as the agent basically moves through this pipeline, what services it's used, what it has paid, and what budget it paid from. And that's a theme also back to the community drug development side, because you could basically hook this up to a treasury and then it distributes everything transparently, and you see money go out, data come back, and follow that pipeline through. And this was basically only possible as of, I'd say, like the end of last year, because that's when a lot of the or a few of the, let's say, early adopting wet labs made their services API available. So you could literally have the agent send the experiment to the wet lab to get the results. And another side note is that what we're seeing is that because a lot of these labs want more throughput of experiments, they're willing to adopt programmatic rails in order to make that happen. So I guess what I'm trying to emphasize here, there's multiple forces that put wind behind these sails to make it possible. And so just to give a little bit of a behind the scenes, how this then looks, you basically have one of these claw harnesses, you have skills using different tools, they have a tiered memory system that keeps track of these gates. And what I want to highlight there is that this is really like a UX layer. We're not saying this cures cancer on its own as a kind of agentic harness, but it eases the pathway for using all these tools, keeping track of them, and scaling up the volume of work that can be done. Now, importantly, as you'll see here, this uses some more traditional offerings, but this is where we would love to plug, like our approach has been, how do we make this modular so we can swap out what models we're using, where those models are running, and so on. And this has really been a way to speed run, seeing like, is it viable at all, but with a view to how you can then replace the components to harden exactly to the sovereign AI side. And then on top of that, we can then also manage these agents more effectively. And I just wanted to show this as a way to say, again, from a modular perspective, plug this in to new models as they come out, and ideally to the preferences of then greater sovereignty over where that data lives as we move into using, going beyond the prototype phase. And so overall, the kind of ecosystem that we want to move towards, and this is where the Easter egg of the Dark Bio device is that the pathway is there from where you can then, from sequencing your genome, putting it on a piece of hardware with full custody of that journey, essentially, through to then, handing that data off to an agentic fleet that can make progress using verified protocols and templates that, biologists have been involved in creating, handing that off to the wet lab programmatically, getting that data back, and starting that flywheel where that data is then fully owned by those communities that are running those fleets, or even the individuals, to be able to optimize their own models. And this slide is doing a lot of work, I should highlight, because this validation phase combines, a lot of stuff downstream of that. But what's exciting is that there's models, there's an interesting company called Atl that's built out modular labs in China that really is a blueprint for how you could even do that validation structure in one physical unit. And so we're already talking also in Europe to European R&D funders about how they could invest into infrastructure that allows for these modular physical spaces to be there that then run these processes with then on-chain validation throughout it. And so this is where this project, for example, was led by Molecule. Some of you might be familiar with them. They've built out now a new on-chain lab that basically means that as the agent goes through this, it's reporting everything it's doing onto a verified container of all that data. And you can also fractionalize ownership of that data. So really, all these pieces are now coming together to make this possible. But there's many, 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 many details that need to be gotten right. And so that's why I'm excited to be here in a room with many of the pieces who are building different parts of this stack to make this possible. And then just to bring it a little bit to life, this is then the site of the agent where you can then see a snapshot of its current research taking place. So that's on a website, and you see here candidates going through the gates, essentially. And we'll be making that more and more real time. And then you can basically jump over and see, for example, the lab where the on-chain component of this lives, where you can basically both store data but also hash it, essentially. Importantly, the other part of the community development side is that you can have that information translated into different formats that can be consumed by different players as well. So, if a patient community doesn't have as much depth on the science, you can translate it to communicate to them too. And then just one last piece that I think is worth mentioning on this side is that I think it's really to emphasize that now, for example, there's this one project called Subseq.bio. It's one guy who basically has some GPUs and offers a bunch of open computational models that are called Bio API. Now, right now, I can't verify that this guy is doing what he says he's doing, but we talk to him on the phone, so we use like human trust to build some trust that it's actually doing what he says he's doing. But it would be great if we had like trustless systems to attest that these things are actually working as they are. So that's just, again, anyone working in this space, please come to us because we want to harden all of this. And we see that the different ecosystem providers are excited to take part. And then another exciting an exciting part of this that brings it to life. There was already some mention of the Foresight nodes. Brad will be talking about it later too. But we're working on a project there to basically, some of you may have come across Seth Ho's basically like how I sequenced my genome at home protocol. We'll be getting this hardware and basically setting up a sequencing station at the Foresight node, and hopefully Peter can supply us with some dark bio hardware, so you could have full chain of custody from like swab to device, and then enter this universe that way. So I think I just want to highlight here that these things are all kind of really happening, to put it that way, on that ecosystem map, noting that there's still details to fill. And then another part just to mention is that we're then also via Foresight. I'm working on a project where basically we're using smart classes. This is one open source aligned initiative so that when you're filming yourself doing your protocol, it can guide you through that process. And we're also working then with scientists in the lab where they can film what they're doing. So this is just a way to kind of build up the data set. That means that you can share the know-how across a lot of these complex steps and have verification that you did the right thing and so on, to the point of like, even if you make a mistake in the protocol, that will affect your data and affect your results. So that's just to kind of show that all these pieces of this are now coming together and becoming reality, which is kind of wild. So very excited to work with many of you here to make this happen. And yeah, so happy to take any questions on this. Sorry, the beginning was a little bit disrupted, so let me know if you have any questions or clarifications on that. Thank you.
Yeah, any questions?
I was just wondering where the agents, where do they get their research from? Or what are they researching? What are their sources?
Yeah, so basically this is where, yeah, so the question here was where do the agents get their source of information? So the whole idea with the different skills is that they can then leverage different also AI scientific tools to do, like, for example, people are specializing on just the literature review side of things. So it will be searching through literature. For example, BioS is one tool that lets you do that. There's other tools as well that allow you to also, you could do this yourself, but then you can also have kind of custom flows that have been developed by others to look across existing research, clinical data, and so on. And then the other part, just to mention, is that there's the generative portion of this as well, where you use generative models to kind of come up with the new peptide design. So it's like an interplay between kind of the literature and those generative models.
All right. Thank you again, Martin.